I want to talk about something that I have been tracking really closely over the past really few years, and that is the insane distortion of our laws. And this is part of what Donald Trump was talking about in his CPAC speech when he was saying that we need liberation and we need judgment. We need liberation from this crazy distortion, and we need judgment of individuals who have unlawfully gotten us there. And the scope of this is really beyond what you would imagine. And I just want to give you a few examples, because what I endeavor to do as a host is arm you with facts to put in your arsenal that you can go out and deploy when people challenge you and they go, oh my gosh, you're a, as the Guardian would say, demagogue, white supremacist, faithful eating out of the hand of Donald Trump if you support Donald Trump. No, that's not true. Most people are trying to get away from this crazy stuff. And so we have seen this trend percolate for several years, the distortion of language. And here's what happens. It starts off in everyday life, and then it kind of trickles outward, and it shows up in newspapers, it shows up in our schools, it kind of spreads to the way people just colloquially, talk with one another, and then it becomes a bedrock of our culture, and then it becomes part of the legal system. This is, I could give a million examples, but we see this all the time, right? Sexism as a word has become hijacked of its meaning. You know what's sexist? Iran. Iran is a sexist, misogynistic country, which systemically discriminates against women. They have the age of criminal responsibility for women is younger than that of men. If women are raped in Iran, they need 4 male Muslim witnesses to corroborate their story. That is sexism. But in the United States, we use the word sexism very superfluously. Mansplaining is sexist, for instance, and that word becomes devoid of its meaning. And again, this starts at a small level and then it trickles up, or it goes up. How about the word racism? Another word totally has now lost its meaning. Microaggressions are now racist. Being a supporter of Donald Trump, being conservative, is called racist. White supremacy doesn't mean what it used to anymore. According to the Smithsonian Institute, objectivity is white supremacy. Other virtues like delaying fun until you work is called white supremacist. The whole idea of silence is violence or language is violence. Another example of the distortion of language. No, silence isn't violence. Silence is silence, and violence is violence. Words are not violence. Words are words, and violence is violence. So I remember a few years ago when I was kind of waking up to the absurdity of all of this, becoming more right-leaning, I would talk with some of my peers about this in college. And I remember that a lot of people would say to me, okay, well, what's the harm? Yeah, I agree with you that some of these terms their meanings have been hijacked and people use them a bit recklessly. But what's the harm? This moment is going to peter out. Well, let me tell you what the harm is. It is now so harmful that our judges, our lawmakers, lawyers who are in charge of protecting us and adjudicating the law fairly are taking these meanings and twisting and subverting the law to essentially have these words mean whatever they want to serve their political agenda. So let's look at a few examples. Let's look at this idea of the word abuse, which used to have a objective, agreed upon meaning, okay? Well, now abuse has a bit of a different meaning. There's a new bill in the state of Illinois. It's called HB 4876, House Bill. You can look it up on the internet. I have a screenshot of it right here. And it is trying to change. It hasn't been passed into law yet. It's been passed by the House. It's trying to change the Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act in the state of Illinois to alter the definition of an abused child to, quote, one whose parent denies the child access to necessary medical care, including abortion services or gender-affirming services. So essentially, if you are a parent who says that your minor child cannot get their breasts chopped off in the name of changing their gender, or cannot take puberty blockers, or cannot go get an abortion, you can now be deemed as an abusive parent. Your child can be deemed as an abusive child, and it would empower, if passed into law, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services to take your child away from you. And as we see at the bottom of that act, it says that it comes with criminal liability. So not only can you have your child removed from you, but you can face criminal charges, which include fines and even jail time. This is insane. An abused child used to mean a child that was abused. Abused, beaten, neglected, horribly treated. But now when a parent is trying to actually prevent the child from being abused, when a parent is saying to their child, no, you cannot get your breast chopped off at age 14 or 15 or 16, the irony is they are trying to protect their child from abuse. They're trying to be non-abusive parents by helping their child wait until they're older to make that informed decision. But this is an outgrowth of this crazy world that we live in, where words don't have objective meaning anymore. They can be twisted to mean whatever they want. It has real on-the-ground consequences. Let's look at Washington State. That Illinois law is currently a bill. It has not yet passed both parts of the Congress in the state of Illinois, and it has not yet been signed by the governor. But a similar bill was, in fact, passed into law in 2023 by the governor of Washington State. This is Senate Bill 5599 for those who want to look it up. And what it says is that shelters, state-run shelters who have runaway kids come to them to seek help, do not have to report to parents that their children ran away from them if those children ran away from their parents to seek, you guessed it, gender-affirming care or abortions. So I have screenshots here of the law because it's really important that people see, I'm not making this up. Here's the law right in front of you, okay? Screenshot. In the law, they have compelling reasons that they say that you can be allowed to not notify a parent of the presence of a kid at a shelter. If there are compelling reasons not to notify the parent, the shelter or organization must instead notify the department. Then they define compelling reason as gender-affirming treatment and reproductive health care. Right there. So you're telling me that this is, again, an abusive parent whose kids deserve to run away and get away from them because they won't allow their kids to have gender-affirming care or abortions? Really? Let's look at another example. Look what happened in Indiana recently. An Indiana parent had their child taken away from them because they didn't use proper pronouns. And this is a Catholic couple in the state of Indiana, which is a red state, so this can happen anywhere, which is, I believe, exactly what they said. And the Attorney General for Indiana did say that the reason that this child was taken away from their parents wasn't because the parents were not affirming the child's gender. They say it's because the child had an eating disorder, and the parents not using the child's preferred pronouns was exacerbating the child's eating disorder. But that's just a way of trying to get around having any controversy, right? And the main issue is that the parents were not using the child's preferred pronouns, and that is the reason, whether it was contributing to an eating disorder or not, that the state took the child away from the parents. It's beyond sick. My heart breaks for these families who are going through this. So that's the way the word abuse has been distorted. Let's look at the word discrimination, which also used to have an objective meaning. Now, always, throughout the history of the law, of course, no single word has a totally agreed upon objective meaning. But our civilization rests on coming pretty damn close to agreeing what a term means. And when civil rights law, for instance, was passed in the 1960s, when they were referring to discrimination, they were referring to Jim Crow. They were referring to separate lunch counters, separate water fountains, separate public schools. Black people being hosed down in the South in the streets for protesting against their unequal treatment. That is what discrimination meant, right? Well, let's look at how it's being used now. I reported on this recently. Actually, a different story. This is not something I reported on recently. The next one is. But the California Department of Education is now saying that notifying a parent of a child's transition is discrimination. There's this Rockland Unified School District. It's a school district in Sacramento, and they passed a policy which said that parents have to be notified if their parent is, or if their child, is transitioning or change their name or change their pronouns. And the California Department of Education sent a letter saying that that policy, quote, fails to comply with California Education Code prohibitions against discrimination. This is the one I reported on recently. California recently passed a law which said that if you are a department store with 500 or more employees, you must have a gender-neutral toy section in that store. Now, this is scary for a number of reasons, the main one being that the government used to not be able to go in and tell private businesses how to run their businesses. It also violates the First Amendment because the First Amendment says that the government cannot infringe on your right to speak. But also in that, if the government can't tell you that you can't speak, the government can't also compel you to speak. And the government is compelling these stores effectively to speak by mandating that they have to have a gender-neutral, clearly marked, clearly labeled toy section. But guess what they cited as their reason for defying our rule of law and having the government go into private businesses and tell private businesses what to do? They said it's discrimination. They cited the Unruh Civil Rights Act in the state of California, which was passed in the 1960s to prevent discrimination, unequal treatment of Black people, okay? And now this Civil Rights Act is being cited to say that if you don't have gender-neutral toys in a store, it's discrimination. This is crazy. But the origin of this is silence is violence. The origin of this is objectivity is white supremacy. Microaggressions are racist. You know, mansplaining is sexist. That is the origin of it. I'll give you a final example. How about the idea of a hate crime, right? Punishable by prison time, punishable by fines. A hate crime used to mean a hate crime, where someone goes out with a club and whacks someone because they are, you know, a different race, a different religion, and yells slurs at that person and physically violently assaults that person. That is a hate crime. Well, a new bill is trying to be passed in the state of Michigan, which would deem misgendering someone to be a hate crime. Let's pull up this picture. This is House Bill 4474 in Michigan. And it says that it would criminalize those who cause a member of a protected class, and they are now saying that gender identity or expression is a protected class. You know, protected classes were, you know, people who were religious minorities or racial minorities, and now they're saying that if you're gay, if you're lesbian, if you're trans, if you're LGBTQ, you count as a protected class. And what it would do is it would criminalize people who, quote, cause members of that protected class to feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened. You notice the use of that word feel. If you feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened, that is enough, right? Now it can be a hate crime to misgender someone if that law is passed in Michigan. This is why we have to be so scrupulous and precise with our language. It starts at a small level, it goes to a much bigger level. And going through this, researching for this segment reminded me of one of my favorite quotes, which, Sean, I'm going to have you look up because I don't know if I can say it by memory. It's the John Adams whale going through the net quote, where he's talking about the Constitution. And essentially what John Adams said is, our system here in the United States of freedom was created for a religious people. Now, what he really meant by that was a reasonable people, a people who are guided by values. And if we lose those values, if we get so obsessed with language and politics and, you know, distorting our laws to mean what we want them to mean, then we lose our entire system, because this freedom rests upon reasonable people making reasonable decisions.
It would break the strongest chords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net.
Yep.
Our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people.
Yep.
It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other.
Boom.